What we're looking at today are Carlos Castaneda's books and his search for what he called becoming a man of knowledge. He has a mentor, Don Juan, a Yaqui Indian, that is teaching him how to be more warrior-like. And I like to see this as a way of Carlos seeking mental training, and that's certainly how we're going to be looking at this. Now, I know that Castaneda has like some questionableness to his character, and I'd like to encourage you to see if you can separate, not condone his behavior, but at the same time be able to look for the wisdom that you can find in his works. So, encourage you to see if you can do that. Number two is some people question whether or not Don Juan existed. And I think it's kind of a really not an important point. I think it's a moot point because we can learn from fiction works, just like nonfiction works. Uh, so, for example, if you take Lord of the Rings, it's fictional works that Tolkien wrote, and there's one scene where they're going through the mines of Moria, and Frodo is lamenting about, the trouble that the ring has brought him, and Gandalf looks at him and he says, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times." But that is not for them to decide. All they have to decide is what to do with the time that's given them, or something like that. Well, you know there's wisdom in, a saying like that. So, and I'd like to look at the Castaneda works, with that light. Let's look for the wisdom without getting caught up in or distracted by his questionable character or whether or not Don Juan existed. So to start, Don Juan teaches Carlos about things like personal power, shifting perception, developing awareness, impeccable use of attention, using death as an advisor of how to live your life. These are important topics, for how you live your life. They're important topics for mental training. They got power, perception, awareness, attention. These are core issues in mental training. So let's take a look at, for starters, we'll look at the power of silence. A little quote here, just to start. Every warrior on a path of knowledge thinks at one time or another that he's learning sorcery, but all he's doing is allowing himself to be convinced of the power hidden in his being and that he can reach it. Okay. So first of all, we're not doing magic, we're not doing sorcery, and what Don Juan is teaching Carlos is not sorcery, it's not magic. It's practical, important ways for developing awareness and using attention. And specifically, in this one quote, it kind of addresses like a core issue in mental training, and that is that we have this tendency to not be convinced that we have power within us and then we can't access it. I know I've struggled with my own self-doubt and my ego and wasn't very convinced, that I was very powerful and that then I couldn't access that power. So being able to understand and believe that we can, know that we can, we have this power within us and that we can access it. That's wisdom coming from power of silence. Okay? Now, I want to go through just a few different points, that of what Don Juan is teaching Carlos, so we can seek the mental training out of them. So first of all, Don Juan teaches Carlos about hunting for personal power. Carlos is like kind of a complainer. He's always pitying himself, and Don Juan tells him something very profound. And I know I've quoted this before in other lessons, but it comes out of Tales of Power. And that is that the basic difference between an ordinary man and a warrior is that a warrior takes everything as a challenge, while an ordinary man takes everything either as a blessing or a curse. The fact that you're here today indicates that you have tipped the scales in the favor of the warrior's way. So, first of all, the last part of that quote is important. Like, the fact that you're here shows that you've tipped the scales in the direction of the warrior's way. By showing up for challenges, you tip the scales toward being more warrior-like. You find the way to be in those situations more effectively. The first part of the quote, we have this tendency to feel blessed or cursed based on if we're stressed or comfortable in our lives. And a simple example, I'm sure if you're a climber, like if you reach for a big hold like this, you're going, oh, that's a good hold, right? Why? Because it's comfortable to grab. But if you are grabbing a small hold, I mean, this would be a good hold for some climbers. But if you're grabbing a small hold, you might equate it as bad. So what we do is we label stress. This is just more stressful than the bigger hold. We label stress as bad and comfort as good. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is that learning doesn't happen in the good comfort zone. It happens in the bad stress zone. So if you're unconsciously labeling stress as bad, you're going to move away from it. You don't move toward what you might label bad situations. You move away from it. You move toward comfort. So you're sabotaging your own learning process. And, an important part of mental training is like bringing some awareness to this whole process. Like I said, we make that labeling unconscious. Let's bring some consciousness to it. So what Don Juan is teaching Carlos is like to honor these challenges that you have in your life. See them as neutral. They're just a challenge. Engage them as such. In fact, for hunting for power, you need to actually seek out situations that are challenging. And he calls this process honoring your petty tyrants. A challenge is like something that's stressful, and a petty tyrant is like a person or a situation that just irritates you toward distraction of your attention. So Don Juan is telling Carlos, like, you need to honor these situations. Honor them because of the learning opportunity that's in them. And if you see challenges as just neutral, then you'll be more able to do that. So that's one important lesson. Another big one that I like to call kind of the master skill in mental training, and that is unhooking thinking from awareness. Now, Castaneda, or Don Juan, calls it stopping the world. So what happens from a mental training perspective, we have this internal dialogue going on. You're talking to yourself constantly. And if you can't get some perspective about that whole process, then you're just lost in it. And that's when you can be really reactive. So this internal dialogue is kind of like the mind is spinning. Okay, and this is what Don Juan is talking about. It's like you need to stop the world from spinning. You need to stop the mind from spinning like that so that you can be more aware and more intentional with how you use your attention. Now, I've found that you really can't stop your internal dialogue. You can't stop the world. But what you can do is you can be more intentional about where you choose to focus your attention. And this unhooking thinking from awareness, what's going on is from the perspective of awareness, you can notice the mind think and then redirect attention to where you want to focus it. So this master skill is noticing and redirecting, being able to notice and redirect over and over again toward your chosen task. That helps stop the world. Okay. Another thing that Don Juan teaches Carlos is about stalking the ego. They have a really cool, very simple way of understanding our ego. The ego likes to sit up on a throne of self-importance and personal history. The throne is there because it likes to look down on other people, to feel better than other people, and constantly comparing ourselves to other people. So it wants to feel more important, and it uses your personal history to validate its importance, successes. Okay, but you know what happens. What about all those failures? So the ego also ties those failures to how you feel about yourself, to your identity. But the ego has a nice little trick there. It likes to shirk the blame, make excuses, so that you don't feel so bad about yourself for those failures. So an important skill here, stalking the ego, is to separate your identity, how you feel about yourself, from the outcomes that you're creating. Just separate. You're not good or bad or better or more important or worse or whatever because of your performance, your efforts. You're not better because you're a success. You're not worse because you're a failure. That limits your ability to be objective and just focus on learning. So describe your outcomes objectively. What did you do well? What do you still need to learn? And then focus on the learning. That can really help. Another thing that Don Juan teaches Carlos is impeccable use of attention. Okay, and basically attention focused on the task. You may think that you can control your thinking or control your behaviors or control your emotions. In reality, you have some influence over those, but what you really can control, and you really can't control this 100% either, is your attention. So for example, you can behave better really because you're controlling your attention and how you choose to behave, and how you're focusing on what you're going to say and how you're going to behave. So at a more foundational level, attention is really all you can control. And that's what we teach in our clinics, is like, what does your attention need to be focused on, and then give you practices for being able to focus it on those tasks. So in Journey to Ixtlan, Don Juan has a little quote about that. Okay, it says, "A warrior is impeccable when he trusts his personal power, regardless of whether it is small or enormous." Okay, don't wait. You can't wait till you have a bunch of personal power to start taking action and moving your life forward. What Don Juan is saying is start now. Work with what you've got. Trust yourself. Trust the situations, and how life is unfolding. Find the learning in them. Don't wait. And Don Juan teaches Carlos some very practical ways of being able to do your mental training. And this is like central to our teaching. And it comes from, I have a little quote that emphasizes this out of the Eagle's Gift. And here he says, a warrior must evoke intent. The glance is the secret. The eyes beckon intent. Okay, the eyes. Again, before I said impeccable use of attention, right? You got to focus attention on the task if you want to be more empowered, if you want to be more purposeful. Well, use your eyes, a very practical thing you can do. Look at what needs attention. Okay. We teach a thinking process when we're at a stopping point on a climb. You have to think to gather information. Well, look at what you need to think about. Like, look up, identify your next stopping point where you have protection. Look down, see what that fall consequence is. Look up again to determine your plan, for how you're going to climb, to achieve the goal. If you're falling, looking down into the fall, so you can orient yourself and be attentive to the fall. Very practical ways coming from Don Juan and Castaneda about mental training. Okay. Another point that Don Juan teaches Carlos is about using death as an advisor. They have a kind of a cool little image about death is, rides on your shoulder just a little bit behind you. So everywhere you go, death is right there. It sounds a bit morbid, but what's going on is that you can waste a lot of time in your life, especially when you're young. I just feel like, oh, you got such a long time to live, and you do all of these meaningless things, and just kind of cope with life. When you get older, like I'm getting older, especially when your parents die, like my last parent, my father died 3 years ago, the proximity of death is a lot closer. My father lived till 93. He was 27 years older than me. If I live as long as him, I have 24 more years to live. It's not a lot of time. So when death is close, the proximity is there, you don't mess with unimportant things. Like, you choose to live your life more on what is important to you. Okay. And one important way that death's proximity has on your attitude, I know it has on mine, is to be more grateful. I wake up every morning, I go outside, I take in a breath of fresh air, and express my gratitude for being able to be alive one more day and to meet the challenges as courageously as I can, to be grateful for those challenges. I'm grateful for being able to have a career, where I'm investigating mental training like this, and it does come with its challenges and struggles, certainly, work that I don't particularly like as much as some other work in it. But to meet all of those different challenges, just with courage and this neutral way, to see them as just learning opportunities, to be grateful for them, to honor them. We can find a quote from that out of A Separate Reality, where Don Juan tells Carlos, a warrior thinks of his death when things become unclear. Okay. You lose clarity when you're not focused on what's most important for you. You're skimming along the surface about just meaningless activities and things, going on in your life. The important things are deeper. You're not unclear when you're grounded in those deeper issues. And death helps you stay grounded. The last point I'll share with you is Don Juan teaches Carlos about following a path with heart. Okay, with heart. You get into climbing or an activity because you love it, right? Of course, different things happen later on. You chase the numbers, just want to improve, and your ego ties identity to outcome, and then you get lost in some other motivation. But there's something about climbing that you love, like the challenge. Like, you don't want it to just be easy. Why you want to climb 510s after you can climb 5.9s? Why do you want to climb 5.11s when you can climb 5.10, etc.? We want to feel like we're growing, right? So we want to be challenged. You get into climbing because you love it. Well, love the challenge, right? You can choose, how you engage with your climbing or any activity that you're doing. If you're in your career, in your work, you know, someone once said that you can either do what you love or love what you do. Well, I think most work is a combination of both of those. Even my work, there's some things that I do that I don't love so much, but then love what I do. Like find some joy in it, and if you can find a way to see how are you serving others in what you're doing, even if it seems like a menial job, then you'll find more joy in it. So for a practice tip, I call this like hunting for personal power, and it has to do with shifting perception. And I'm going to pull from these points that I shared with you. Number one, unhook thinking from awareness. Okay, be able to notice your mind think and don't get lost in it. Don't let it spin you out of control. Notice it, pause, so that then you can go to step two and see the situation more objectively. That neutral challenge, not equating being blessed or cursed, because it's stressful or comfortable in your life. Describe it objectively. And number three, focus your attention impeccably. So whatever the task is, focus your attention on it, learn what you can from it, process yourself through it, and then move on to the next challenge. All right, that's the lesson.